I am Julian Vance, 28 years old. Just 10 days ago, my family inherited a massive $18 million estate and a fleet of hypercars, while I was handed nothing but a small, sealed envelope. While I was grieving the only man who ever loved me, my own mother looked at me in a room full of lawyers and family, laughed right in my face and said, "Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much." They mocked me right there in front of the entire legal team. But there is one thing they didn't know. That little envelope held a secret so powerful it would rewrite our entire family history. And right now, the same people who laughed at me are begging on their knees to save them from total bankruptcy. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe in karma and true justice. And don't forget to let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Now, let's go back to where it all started. I stepped out of the automatic doors at nice Côte d'Azur airport, and the bright Mediterranean sun hit me like a physical force. I was 28 years old, making $44,000 a year as a paramedic back in Baltimore, Maryland. I was wearing scuffed steel-toed work boots, faded denim jeans, and a jacket that had seen way too many overnight shifts. I looked exactly like what I was. A blue-collar guy who had absolutely zero business breathing the rarefied air of the French Riviera. Around me, people were moving with that effortless grace that only comes from deep generational wealth. Women in designer linen, men with watches that cost more than my entire apartment building. And then there was me, gripping the strap of my canvas backpack, feeling the thin paper of an envelope pressing against my chest from inside my jacket pocket. I scanned the arrivals area. Amidst a sea of sleek black suits and digital tablets, I saw him, an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a tailored chauffeur's uniform, holding a crisp white placard with sharp black lettering. It read, "Julian Vance." I walked over, my boots heavy against the polished floor, cleared my throat. "That's me." The man lowered the sign. He didn't sneer, but his eyes did a quick, professional sweep of my appearance. It took him exactly 2 seconds to register that the man standing before him did not match the name on his manifest in any logical sense. The expectation was undoubtedly someone dripping in designer labels, someone who belonged in this world. The reality was a guy who usually spent his Tuesday nights doing chest compressions on the wet asphalt of East Baltimore. "Mr. Vance, welcome to Nice," he said, his English flawless, wrapped in a thick, refined French accent. "My name is Gerard. I will be driving you to Monaco." I blinked. I had barely slept on the transatlantic flight, and the jet lag was a thick fog in my brain. "Thank you. Who sent you?" Gerard's posture shifted. It was a microscopic change, a slight stiffening of the spine. It was the kind of involuntary physical reaction people have when they invoke the name of someone who commands absolute, unquestionable authority. "Sir, the prince wants to see you." I did not have a response for that. I simply followed him out to the curb where a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class was waiting. When I slid into the back seat, the heavy door closed with a solid, isolating thud, shutting out the noise of the airport. The interior smelled of expensive leather and quiet money. The drive from Nice to Monaco takes about 30 minutes along the Moyen Corniche, a winding road carved directly into the cliffs high above the Mediterranean Sea. I stared out the tinted window. Down below, the water was an impossible, endless blue, dotted with white yachts that looked like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, but it felt entirely alien. I felt like an imposter. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was a man who lived in a modest brick row house in Baltimore. He wore the same 3 heavy wool sweaters in rotation every winter. He drove a 15-year-old station wagon. He ran a mid-sized maritime logistics company and spent his weekends tinkering on his old sailboat. How in the world did a man like that have a connection to a prince in Monaco? Gerard navigated the tight, winding streets of the principality, eventually approaching the Palais du Prince, the royal palace on the Rock of Monaco. We bypassed the main tourist areas and slipped through a heavily guarded private entrance. When the car stopped, Gerard opened my door. "Prince Albertine will receive you in the private residence. Please follow me." I walked through stone courtyards older than the United States, down corridors lined with centuries-old oil paintings. The silence in those halls was heavy, the kind of silence that has been keeping secrets for generations. Finally, Gerard opened a set of heavy oak doors and gestured for me to enter. The room was a massive library, flooded with golden sunlight overlooking the harbor. Standing near the window was a man in his late 70s. He was tall, silver-haired, radiating an aura of absolute command. He wore a simple gray suit, but the tailoring was so precise it looked like armor. He turned as I walked in. I expected a cold, royal greeting. Instead, the hard lines of his face melted. His expression shattered into something profoundly personal and deeply grieving. It was the look of a man who had just seen a ghost he desperately missed. "You have his jawline," the prince said softly. "And the way you stand exactly like him." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You knew my grandfather?" Prince Albertine stepped forward and extended his hand. His grip was iron-tight. "I knew Arthur Vance for 41 years. He was the greatest friend I ever had. I have been waiting for you, Julian. It is time you knew the truth about your family." To understand the absolute insanity of that moment, you have to understand the nightmare I had just walked away from. You have to understand what happened exactly 10 days earlier, back in a cold, sterile room in Maryland. I thought the worst was over when we buried my grandfather. I was so incredibly wrong. 10 days before I stood in a royal palace, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Charles Sterling, a high-powered estate lawyer in downtown Baltimore. The air in that room was thick, suffocating. It smelled of stale coffee and the specific kind of greed that only surfaces when a wealthy relative dies. There were 9 of us crammed around a table designed for 6. My mother, Eleanor, sat directly across from me. She was adjusting her designer silk scarf, checking her reflection in her phone screen, looking more like she was waiting for a spa appointment than attending her father's will reading. Next to her was my stepdad, Richard Sterling, coincidentally, the lawyer's brother. Richard was a ruthless real estate developer who measured human worth strictly by square footage and stock portfolios. And then there was Tristan, my 25-year-old half-brother, the golden child. Tristan had never worked a hard day in his life. He lived off Richard's credit cards, failed out of 2 expensive private colleges, and spent his days curating an aesthetic lifestyle on Instagram. I sat at the far end of the table, still wearing my dark suit from the funeral. I felt completely invisible. I always did with them. Charles Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. "Let us begin. The estate of Arthur Vance is substantial. Per his final instructions, the assets will be distributed as follows." He looked down at the heavy stack of paper. "To my daughter, Eleanor Vance Sterling, I leave the penthouse apartment at Harbor Point, including all furnishings. Market value is approximately $3.2 million. My mother actually clapped her hands together, a sharp, excited sound. She had been coveting that penthouse for a decade, always commenting on the panoramic views of the inner harbor. To my brother, Marcus Vance, and my son-in-law, Richard Sterling, I leave the controlling 80% stake in Vance Maritime Logistics." Richard smirked, leaning back in his leather chair. He had been trying to get his hands on the company's waterfront warehouses for years to bulldoze them and build luxury condos. "To my grandson, Tristan Sterling," the lawyer continued, "I leave the collection of motor vehicles housed at the county estate. This includes the 2023 Rolls-Royce Phantom, the 2022 Lamborghini Aventador, the Ferrari 488, and the classic Porsche 911. Tristan pumped his fist under the table. "Let's go," he whispered, already pulling out his phone, probably to text his friends about the hypercars he now owned. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I didn't care about the money. I really didn't. I just wanted to hear my grandfather's words. I wanted to know that he remembered our time together. Charles Sterling flipped the page. The room went dead silent. Everyone looked at me. "To my grandson, Julian Vance," the lawyer read, his voice flattening out into a monotone drone. I leave the contents of the sealed envelope provided to my attorney. It is to be opened by Julian alone with the following instruction. Do not open this in front of them. Follow where it leads. The lawyer reached into his leather briefcase and slid a small, standard white envelope across the massive conference table. It stopped right in front of me. I looked down at it. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's unmistakable, shaky cursive. For about 3 seconds, nobody breathed. And then my mother laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a harsh, dismissive, echoing laugh. The kind of laugh that strips you naked and leaves you freezing in the snow. An envelope? She gasped, wiping a tear of amusement from her eye. Everyone else gets the company, a multi-million-dollar penthouse, a literal fleet of supercars, and you get a piece of paper? Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much, Julian. Tristan snickered. Richard just shook his head, looking at me with the same exhausted pity he had shown me since I was a child. My chest tightened until it felt like my ribs were cracking. I grabbed the envelope, shoved it into my jacket pocket, pushed my chair back, and walked out. I didn't say a word. I just walked out into the freezing Baltimore air, my own mother's laughter ringing in my ears. That laughter wasn't new. It was the soundtrack of my entire life. Growing up, I was the heavy baggage my mother brought into her new, shiny marriage with Richard. When Tristan was born, I ceased to exist. Tristan got the private tutors and the massive college fund. I got public school and was told to figure it out myself. I was entirely cut out of the family's financial planning. While they had lavish Thanksgiving dinners at country clubs, I was usually scheduled to work, and no one ever saved me a plate. The only person who ever saw me, who ever really looked at me, was my grandfather Arthur. Every Sunday I would drive down to the marina, and we would take his old, beaten-up sailboat, the Horizon, out onto the Chesapeake Bay. He was a quiet man. He taught me how to sail not by looking at the water, but by feeling the air. Read the wind, Julian, he used to tell me, his weathered hands gripping the wooden wheel. People will lie to your face. Numbers on a spreadsheet can be manipulated, but the wind never lies. If you learn to read the wind, you'll always know what's coming before anyone else does. When I was 19, I watched a paramedic save a woman's life on the sidewalk after a terrible car crash. That day, I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't want to chase real estate deals or push papers. I wanted to be the person who showed up on the worst day of someone's life and made it better. When I told my family, my mother called it a blue-collar tragedy. My grandfather just nodded, patted my shoulder, and said, "You collect lives, Julian. They just collect things. You're the richest one in the room." I needed comfort that night. After the will reading, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic straight to my girlfriend Chloe's apartment. We had been together for 2 years. I thought she was my sanctuary. I stood in her doorway, soaking wet from the freezing rain, and told her what happened. I told her about the penthouse, the Rolls-Royce, the company, and I told her about the envelope. Chloe didn't hug me. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. Her eyes were cold. "So you got nothing," she said. Her voice was flat. "I got a letter, Chloe. But it's not about the money. It's how they treated me." "Julian, stop," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "You're 28. You work insane hours for a paramedic salary that barely covers rent. I'm tired of struggling. Tristan's friend, the one who works in venture capital, we've been talking. I can't build a future with a guy who doesn't even have a college fund or a proper inheritance. I'm sorry. We're done." She shut the door in my face. I stood in the hallway, dripping wet, completely shattered. My family had discarded me. The woman I loved had thrown me away the second she realized there was no payday attached to my name. I was utterly alone. I went back to my truck, turned on the heater, and with shaking, freezing hands, I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Nice, France, and a single sheet of notebook paper with my grandfather's handwriting. "Julian, don't listen to them. I gave them exactly what they deserve. Things that break, rust, and consume. I am giving you what I value most. Go to Monaco. A driver will meet you. Trust me one more time. I sat in the dark for an hour. I had nothing left to lose, so I packed a bag. I thought the pain of betrayal would break me. But sitting in that palace in Monaco, staring at a prince, I realized the storm was just beginning. "Sit down, son," Prince Albertine said gently, gesturing to a heavy velvet armchair by the window. I sat. My mind was spinning so fast I could barely track my own thoughts. The Mediterranean sun was beaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, golden shadows across the library floor. Between us sat a silver tray with a bottle of mineral water and 2 crystal glasses. The prince poured a glass and handed it to me. "Drink. You look like you're about to collapse." I took a sip. The cold water helped ground me. "Your Highness, with all due respect, my grandfather ran a shipping company in Maryland. He lived in a row house. He drank cheap black coffee and watched baseball on a television from 2008. How do you know him?" Prince Albertine smiled, but it was a smile lined with decades of hidden history. He walked over to a grand mahogany desk, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a framed, black-and-white photograph. He set it on the table between us. It was my grandfather, looking much younger, maybe in his early 40s. He was soaking wet, sitting on the deck of a boat, laughing. Next to him, equally drenched and laughing just as hard, was a young Prince Albertine. "Bastille Day, 1984, the prince said, his voice dropping into a quiet, reverent register. "Your grandfather and I were sailing my private yacht off the coast of Corsica. A rogue storm hit us. A bad one. The kind of storm that turns the sea from a playground into a graveyard. The boat capsized. I was thrown into the water and I was caught in the rigging. I was drowning, Julian. I was taking water into my lungs, going down for the last time." He looked me dead in the eyes. Arthur Vance dove into 20-foot swells. He swam through a debris field in the pitch black, cut me loose with a pocket knife, and dragged me onto a floating piece of fiberglass. We clung to that hull for 7 hours until the Coast Guard found us. He saved my life. He didn't ask for a medal. He didn't ask for a royal decree. He just asked for a dry towel and a hot cup of coffee. I stared at the photo. My grandfather had never breathed a single word of this to anyone. Not a whisper. The next morning, the prince continued, pacing slowly across the Persian rug. We made a blood pact. We agreed that whoever died first, the survivor would take care of the person the deceased loved the most. Not the whole family, just the one person who truly mattered. Arthur told me he would know who that person was when the time came. The prince stopped and looked at me. "He chose you, Julian. Years ago. He told me about the boy who wanted to be a paramedic. He told me about the boy who sat in silence on the boat and learned to read the wind. He said to me, 'Albertine, the boy has my real blood, not the greedy blood. The blood that shows up when things get dark.'" My throat closed up. I pressed my palms against my eyes, fighting back a sudden, violent wave of tears. My mother had told me he didn't love me enough. She had laughed at my envelope. And here, halfway across the world, royalty was telling me I was the only one who mattered. "What does this pact actually mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. The prince sat back down, steepling his fingers. "Arthur was not just my friend. For 40 years, he was my shadow advisor. The logistics company in Baltimore was just a front, a hobby to keep him occupied. His real work was here. Your grandfather helped me manage a private, off-the-books investment portfolio. Real estate, venture capital, global shipping infrastructure. His brilliant mind guided my capital." He leaned forward. "That portfolio is currently valued at roughly $800 million. I stopped breathing. My grandfather, the man who argued over $2 coupons at the grocery store, managed a nearly billion-dollar royal portfolio. Per our pact," Albertine said, his tone turning strictly business. "Upon his death, an irrevocable trust was activated in your name. It was funded exactly 10 days ago. It holds $40 million. $40 million. While my family was fighting like vultures over a penthouse and some cars, my grandfather had quietly secured my entire existence. But there is a second part to the envelope, the prince said softly. I am an old man, Julian. I need someone I can trust. I need Arthur's blood in my inner circle. I am offering you a position in my private investment office. You will start at the bottom, learning the ropes, but I want you to take his place at my side. My mind flashed back to Baltimore, to the damp, cold hallway outside Chloe's apartment, to the sneer on Richard's face, to my mother's echoing laughter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, violently pulling me back to reality. I pulled it out. It was a text from Captain Sarah Jenkins, my boss at the EMS station. Hey kid, heard about the funeral. Take all the shifts off you need. We got your back. Sarah was tough as nails, a former combat medic who had taught me everything about keeping my head cool when the world was bleeding out. She was the only mentor I had left. Right below Sarah's message was an Instagram notification. Tristan had posted a story. I tapped it open. It was a video of him revving the engine of the Lamborghini Aventador in front of a high-end club in downtown Baltimore. The caption read, "Thanks for the upgrade, old man. Hashtag blessed, hashtag new money." In the background of the video, Chloe was laughing, holding a glass of champagne, leaning against the hood of my grandfather's car. The betrayal burned like battery acid in my chest. Then, the phone started ringing in my hand. Incoming call, mother. I looked at the prince. He gave me a single, slow nod, granting me permission to answer it. I hit accept and put it on speaker. Hello, Julian. Finally. My mother's voice snapped through the speaker, crisp and irritated. Listen, Richard's lawyer is drawing up some supplemental inheritance documents. Since you were technically left out of the main estate, they need you to sign a legal waiver relinquishing any future claims to the logistics company or the properties. Just a formality. When are you back from your little European vacation? She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask where I was staying. She just needed my signature so they could lock down the money. I gripped the phone. The scared, invisible little boy inside me wanted to yell, wanted to scream at her for being so incredibly callous. But then I remembered my grandfather's voice. Read the wind, Julian. I looked up at Prince Albertine. I looked at the marble columns of the Royal Library. I looked at the $40 million trust document sitting on the desk. I won't be coming back to sign anything, Mother, I said. My voice was perfectly calm. It didn't shake. Excuse me? She scoffed. Julian, don't be dramatic. You don't have the money for a lawyer to fight this, and you certainly don't have a claim to the estate. Stop throwing a tantrum and be an adult. I'm not fighting you for the estate, I said smoothly. You can keep the company. Tristan can keep the cars. You can keep all the things that rust and break. Have a nice life, Eleanor. Julian, you listen to me right now. I ended the call. I didn't block her number. I just put the phone face down on the silver tray. I looked Prince Albertine directly in the eyes. I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt like Arthur Vance's grandson. When do I start? I asked. The storm had officially made landfall, and I was going to learn how to ride it. The transition from a Baltimore paramedic to an apprentice in a sovereign wealth fund was not a fairy tale. It was brutal. Prince Albertine didn't hand me a corner office and a fancy title. He handed me over to Jean-Paul, his senior financial advisor, a terrifyingly brilliant, chain-smoking French banker who possessed zero patience for incompetence. My office was a small, windowless room in the basement of the private investment firm on the Avenue de Monte Carlo. For the first 3 months, I was drowning in spreadsheets, risk assessment models, and global market analyses. The other junior analysts, guys with MBAs from Wharton and Oxford, looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into a Michelin star restaurant. They knew my background. The ambulance driver. They called me behind my back. But what they didn't understand was that being a paramedic teaches you exactly how to handle high-stakes pressure. When you've intubated a patient while trapped inside a crushed vehicle on a dark highway, a fluctuating stock chart doesn't exactly make you sweat. I kept my head down. I showed up 2 hours before everyone else, and I left long after the cleaning crew had gone home. I applied my grandfather's rule. I read the wind. During a high-stakes negotiation with Matteo Rossi, a notoriously difficult Italian shipping magnate, our team was hitting a brick wall. Rossi was threatening to pull out of a massive port infrastructure deal. I sat in the back of the room, completely silent, watching Rossi's body language. I noticed he kept checking a specific news feed on his tablet: labor strikes in Genoa. He wasn't negotiating from a place of power. He was stalling because his own supply chain was paralyzed. During a recess, I pulled Jean-Paul aside and quietly pointed it out. "Don't offer him more money," I said. "Offer him a temporary reroute through our logistics hubs in Marseille to bypass the strikes. He doesn't need capital right now. He needs a lifeline." Jean-Paul looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He took the advice to the table. Rossi accepted the deal 20 minutes later. That afternoon, the ambulance driver jokes stopped entirely. While I was quietly building an empire in the shadows of Monaco, my family was loud, public, and rapidly tearing themselves apart back in Baltimore. I didn't have to spy on them. They broadcasted their own destruction on social media. My Uncle Marcus and Richard had officially taken over Vance Maritime Logistics. What they didn't realize was that my grandfather had structured that company specifically to require his personal relationships to function. Without Arthur Vance, the European shipping partners refused to renew their contracts. Within 4 months, revenues plummeted by 40%. To save face, Marcus started taking out massive, high-interest corporate loans, leveraging the waterfront warehouses as collateral. Then there was my mother. The $3.2 million penthouse came with a brutal reality check, astronomical HOA fees, and crushing property taxes. Without the logistics company generating steady cash flow, her bank accounts were draining at terrifying speed. And Tristan learned a very hard lesson about hypercars. He had taken the Ferrari to a track day, trying to show off for his Instagram followers, and spun it out into a concrete barrier. Because he had skimped on the specialized insurance premium to save money for clubbing, he was personally on the hook for nearly $200,000 in repairs. The Rolls-Royce was quietly repossessed a week later. My grandfather had known exactly what he was doing. He hadn't given them a blessing. He had handed them a beautifully wrapped curse. He gave them assets that required discipline and character to maintain, knowing full well they possessed neither. The breaking point came in late autumn. I was sitting at my desk in Monaco, reviewing a real estate portfolio, when Jean-Paul walked in and dropped a printed email on my keyboard. It was from an international yacht brokerage. I read the subject line, and my blood ran ice cold. Listing details for the 54-foot sailing vessel, the Horizon. My family was selling my grandfather's boat, the only place I ever felt safe, the place where he taught me everything. They were dumping it for quick cash to cover Tristan's debts and my mother's tax liabilities. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. My first instinct was to wire the money myself. With the $40 million in my trust, I could buy the boat 10 times over and never feel it. I reached for my phone, ready to call my private banker. Before I could dial, Prince Albertine walked into my office. He placed his hand over my phone, gently pushing it down. "Do not let emotion dictate your strategy, Julian," the prince said softly. "If they see your name on the purchase order, they will know you have capital. The vultures will flock. They will tie you up in endless litigation trying to break the will." "I can't let strangers take his boat," I gritted out, staring at the paper. "It's the only real piece of him left." Albertine offered a thin, aristocratic smile. "Who said anything about strangers?" 2 weeks later, an anonymous holding company based out of Luxembourg purchased the Horizon for 20% above asking price. My family, desperate and drowning in debt, practically threw the keys at the broker. They didn't ask questions. They just took the money to plug the holes in their sinking ship. The very next morning, a thick manila envelope was delivered to my desk. Inside was the title deed to the Horizon. Under the section for the registered owner, it didn't list a holding company. It listed a single name, Julian Vance. Prince Albertine had bought it quietly and transferred it directly to me. I sat in my basement office, holding the thick, embossed paper, and for the first time since my grandfather died, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of grief. Tears of absolute, overwhelming gratitude. I thought my connection to my family was severed for good. I thought they would slowly fade into bankruptcy, and I would live out my days quietly in Monaco. But fate, and the brutal reality of the business world, had one final, explosive collision planned for us. Because 3 months later, the Monaco Yacht Show rolled into town, and my desperate, debt-ridden family had scraped together their last dollars to buy VIP tickets, hoping to find a wealthy investor to save their collapsing company. They had absolutely no idea whose territory they were walking into. Let me paint a very specific picture for you, because unless you have seen it with your own eyes, it is almost impossible to comprehend the sheer scale of the Monaco Yacht Show. September in the Principality of Monaco is unlike anywhere else on the face of the earth. The brutal, suffocating heat of the Mediterranean summer finally breaks, leaving behind this crisp, golden breeze that sweeps down from the mountains. And for 4 days, Port Hercules transforms into the undisputed epicenter of global wealth. We are not talking about weekend fishing boats or the nice little cruisers you see parked at your local marina back in the States. We are talking about floating palaces, super yachts that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, complete with fully staffed helipads, underwater observation decks, onboard submarines, and crews that outnumber the actual guests 10 to 1. The air smells like expensive aviation fuel, salt water, and the kind of perfume that you cannot buy in a department store. I was no longer the exhausted, underpaid paramedic walking around in scuffed steel-toed boots. It had been 9 months since I opened that little white envelope in the freezing cab of my rusted Ford truck. 9 months of relentless, grueling, mind-bending education under Jean-Paul and Prince Albertine. I was wearing a bespoke navy suit, tailored specifically for my frame in Milan. I had learned how to read a room full of European billionaires, how to negotiate global shipping lanes without giving up leverage, and, most importantly, how to hold my absolute silence until the exact right moment to strike. My entire life had shifted drastically, but my core, the guy who learned to read the wind on the Chesapeake Bay and who always showed up when things got dark, remained exactly the same. Prince Albertine, Jean-Paul, and I were standing on the expansive aft deck of the Lumina, a breathtaking 200-foot vessel owned by a prominent Greek shipping magnate named Kostas. We were in the final stages of closing a massive, multinational infrastructure investment deal. The vintage champagne was flowing into crystal flutes, the contracts were being signed, and I felt a deep, quiet, unshakable sense of pride settling into my bones. I had earned my place at this table, not through a famous last name, not through blind inheritance, but through sweat, late nights, and the character my grandfather had instilled in me. That was exactly when I saw them. I was looking down over the polished teak railing onto the main public promenade of the dock when my eyes locked onto a familiar, chaotic, entirely out-of-place energy. It was my mother, Eleanor. Walking right beside her were my former stepdad Richard, my uncle Marcus, and my golden child half-brother Tristan. They looked incredibly, painfully out of place. You see, true wealth whispers. It wears unbranded, perfectly tailored linen. It moves slowly. It speaks in quiet, measured tones because it has absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. My family, on the other hand, was screaming. Tristan was wearing a loud, heavily branded designer silk shirt that practically screamed, "New money." His eyes darting around frantically, as if he was desperately looking for a camera crew to document his presence. My mother was gripping a horribly flashy designer handbag so tightly that her knuckles were bone white, her face pulled taut with a strained, desperate, terrifyingly fake smile. Marcus was sweating profusely through his expensive collar, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest like it was a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. Richard was walking with his chest puffed out, trying to look dominant, but his eyes betrayed a deep, gnawing panic. Through the prince's extensive intelligence and financial network, I already knew exactly why they were here. Vance Maritime Logistics, the company they had so gleefully stolen from my grandfather's legacy, was bleeding out from a dozen different wounds. Marcus had alienated all of my grandfather's fiercely loyal European partners with his arrogant, corner-cutting American corporate tactics. They were drowning in high-interest corporate debt, and the American banks had completely cut off their credit lines after seeing their catastrophic quarterly earnings. They had scraped together their very last remaining liquid dollars, probably liquidating whatever was left of Tristan's college fund and taking out a second mortgage, just to fly to Monaco. They had bought VIP day passes, desperately hoping to corner a European investor on the docks and beg for a financial bailout. I watched them approach a group of high-level Italian logistics investors near one of the luxury display tents. I watched Marcus step forward, aggressively extending his sweaty hand, clearly trying to pitch his failing company with his usual bullying tactics. I watched the Italians glance at his flushed face, exchange a polite but brutally dismissive look among themselves, and simply turn their backs on him without saying a single word. It was pathetic to watch, but it was also the exact, precise bed they had meticulously made for themselves. I turned away from the railing, fully intending to let them fail in peace. I had absolutely zero desire for a public confrontation. I didn't need closure from them anymore. But the universe has a very funny, very poetic way of forcing you to close your open loops whether you want to or not. I had stepped off the gangway of the Lumina and was walking down the main dock toward our private royal tender when I heard it. That same shrill, condescending, nails on a chalkboard voice that had haunted every single day of my childhood. "Julian, is that you?" I stopped dead in my tracks. I took a slow, deep breath of the salty air, centering myself, and then I slowly turned around. There they were, the four of them standing just 10 feet away, staring at me like I was a ghost that had just crawled out of the harbor. My mother's eyes aggressively raked up and down my tailored suit, taking in the expensive fabric, the custom shoes, the posture of a man who was no longer afraid of her. For a fraction of a second, genuine confusion flashed across her meticulously Botoxed face. But her deeply ingrained arrogance and her pathological need to be superior quickly overrode her basic logic. She simply couldn't process the visual information that I actually belonged in a place like this, so her brain immediately created a degrading narrative that fit her twisted worldview. "What on earth are you doing here?" Eleanor scoffed, stepping closer, her tone dripping with the same old venom. "Did you spend your entire meager paramedic salary just to buy a coach plane ticket to stalk us on our business trip? Or did you finally realize you have no future in medicine and get a job working as a deckhand on one of these boats? Because if you're here to ask us for money, you can forget it." Tristan let out a loud, obnoxious, braying laugh that made several wealthy passers-by turn and glare at him. "Dude, seriously? You couldn't handle real life in Baltimore, so you ran away to serve overpriced drinks to rich people in France? That is the saddest, most pathetic thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Look at you playing dress-up. Julian, you need to leave right this instant," Richard said, stepping forward and using his deep, authoritative CEO voice that he used to intimidate contractors back home. "We are here conducting highly sensitive, high-level international business. We do not have the time or the patience to deal with your childish escapades. You are embarrassing the family name just by being seen on this dock." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shrink into myself the way I used to when I was 19 and terrified of their judgment. I just looked at them. I really, truly looked at them. Beneath the designer clothes and the loud voices, they were absolutely terrified. I could see the dark, exhausted circles under Marcus's eyes. I could see the way my mother's hands were trembling slightly against her expensive purse. They were cornered animals, lashing out because it was the only defense mechanism they had left. "I'm not embarrassing anyone, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly level. "And I don't work as a deckhand." "Oh, please, spare me the lies," Eleanor snapped, aggressively stepping right into my personal space. Her heavy floral perfume was thick and overpowering, masking the smell of stale wine on her breath. "Don't you dare lie to us, Julian. We know exactly what you are. You're a paramedic with no inheritance, no ambition, and no future. You have always been a disappointment. Now turn around, walk away, and go back to whatever cheap hostel you're staying in before I have the marina security escort you out for loitering. Is there a problem here, Julian?" The voice cut through the humid, tense air like a finely sharpened scythe. The crowd of billionaires, models, and brokers on the dock immediately parted like the Red Sea. Prince Albertine, flanked by his two massive, stone-faced personal security guards, stepped up right beside me. He was wearing a flawless white linen suit, and his mere presence radiated an absolute, suffocating, undeniable aura of ultimate power. Uncle Marcus's jaw practically unhinged, dropping open in sheer disbelief. Richard completely froze in his tracks, his eyes bugging out of his head. They were in the international shipping business. They knew exactly who Prince Albertine of Monaco was. He wasn't just royalty. He was the undisputed kingmaker of the entire European maritime industry. One word from him could sink a fleet or build an empire. My mother, sensing the sudden, massive shift in power but completely and utterly misunderstanding her place in it, immediately put on her most charming, sickeningly fake socialite smile. "Your Royal Highness," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave into a syrupy purr, practically bowing as she extended her trembling hand. "I am so incredibly sorry if this young man was bothering you. I am Eleanor Vance Sterling of the Baltimore Vance family. This is my son, Julian. He has always been a bit of a troubled, lost boy. Please accept my deepest apologies. We will take him off your hands immediately and ensure he doesn't bother you again." Prince Albertine did not look at her. He did not acknowledge her extended hand. He didn't even blink in her direction. He simply turned his regal gaze to me. "Julian," the prince said, his voice carrying clearly over the gentle lapping of the harbor water, completely ignoring my mother's existence. "Did you finish reviewing the quarterly risk assessments for the Asian commercial real estate acquisitions?" "I did, Your Highness," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with my mother's suddenly pale face. "I've authorized the transfer of funds. The portfolio is completely secure and the holding companies have been restructured to your exact specifications." "Excellent work as always," Prince Albertine said softly. "Remind me, what is the current liquid valuation of that specific trust under your direct management?" $40 million, sir," I said. The silence that fell over my family in that moment was absolute. It was the kind of deafening, heavy silence you hear in a total vacuum. I watched my mother's fake, syrupy smile physically collapse, the muscles in her face giving out as the reality of my words hit her like a freight train. I watched Tristan's arrogant, mocking smirk melt into a mask of utter, horrifying confusion. "Good," Prince Albertine said, nodding slowly. He finally turned his icy gaze to my family. His eyes were like looking into a glacier. "I believe you are Arthur Vance's relatives, the ones who inherited the visible, depreciating estate. I am Prince Albertine, and this man—" He paused, placing a firm, fatherly, incredibly grounding hand on my shoulder, "is Julian Vance. He is the chief operations strategist of my private investment firm. He is the sole beneficiary of my lifelong blood pact with his grandfather. And he is the undisputed heir to a $40 million trust. Now, you will step away from my advisor immediately, before I have my security detail throw all four of you into the harbor for harassment." I had imagined this exact moment 1,000 times in my head during those long, lonely nights in Baltimore. I thought I would feel angry. I thought I would want to scream at them, to list every single time they had made me feel worthless. But looking at them right now, standing there completely stripped of all their grand illusions and fake superiority, I didn't feel anger at all. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. They were nothing but dust in the wind, and I knew exactly how to read it. For a solid, agonizing 10 seconds, nobody moved a single muscle. The warm Mediterranean sun continued to beat down on the wooden dock. The seagulls cried out overhead, but my family looked as if they had just been violently shoved into a freezing, icy lake. They were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the truth. 40 million? My mother finally stammered, the words literally choking in her throat. Her voice sounded thin, reedy, and incredibly old. She looked frantically from me to the prince and then back to me, Her brain was violently short-circuiting. The sole metric by which she had judged me my entire life, my perceived lack of wealth and status, had just been completely and utterly obliterated in front of her eyes. "Julian, you have $40 million? How? Why didn't you tell us?" "I don't have it, Mother. I manage it. It's an irrevocable trust." I corrected her, my voice deadpan, completely devoid of the emotional desperation I used to have when speaking to her. Something my grandfather quietly set up for me years ago, because he knew exactly what kind of people you were, and he knew exactly what you would do to the rest of the estate the second his heart stopped beating. Uncle Marcus suddenly snapped out of his shock. The paralyzing awe was instantly replaced by a rabid, clawing desperation. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from the chests of the prince's security detail, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Julian, my boy, my nephew," Marcus cried out, his voice cracking with a sickeningly fake, desperate warmth that made my stomach turn. "I knew it. I always knew Arthur had a grand, overarching plan. Listen to me, Julian, we are family. Blood is thicker than water. Vance Maritime Logistics is struggling right now. We hit a rough patch with the European supply chains. We just need a temporary bridge loan. 5 million, maybe 10 million at the most. With your royal connections and the liquidity of that trust, you could save the entire family legacy. You could save all of us right now." "Save you?" I let out a sharp, cold, humorless laugh that echoed off the nearby yachts. "Marcus, you didn't even save me a seat at my own grandfather's funeral. You let me sit in the very back row next to the catering staff. You told the funeral director I wasn't immediate family." Richard puffed out his chest, desperately trying to reclaim some microscopic shred of his dominant alpha male persona, clearly reverting to his default setting of intimidation. "Julian, be reasonable. Stop acting like a petulant child. You are holding a massive amount of capital that rightfully belongs in the family ecosystem. We have the physical infrastructure in Baltimore. We can merge our assets. We will generously give you a seat on the executive board. You owe it to this family to help us. If you don't step up, we might be forced to pursue aggressive legal action to contest the legality of this hidden offshore trust. I have a very aggressive legal team back home who would love to look into asset concealment." I stared at him. I genuinely could not believe the sheer, unadulterated, blinding audacity of this man. Even while begging for his life, he couldn't help but threaten me. "You want to talk about your lawyers, Richard?" I took a deliberate step forward, completely ignoring the massive security guards flanking me. I looked him dead in the eye, stripping away every ounce of power he thought he had. "You want to talk about your brother, Charles Sterling? The lawyer who read the will and smirked at me? Let's talk about him. In fact, let's talk about the massive, gaping trap you all walked blindly into with huge smiles on your faces." I saw Marcus pale dramatically. All the blood rushed out of his face. He took a staggering half-step back. "What are you talking about? What trap?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising to a panicked, shrill pitch. "You really thought my grandfather was just a doddering old fool, didn't you?" I said, my voice rising just enough to command the space, ensuring every single word landed like a physical blow. "You thought he was just a simple old man from Baltimore who didn't understand modern corporate finance. But Arthur Vance was a grandmaster at a game you didn't even know you were playing. And you were all just greedy, predictable pawns." I pointed a sharp finger directly at Marcus's chest. "You inherited an 80% controlling stake in Vance Maritime Logistics. You thought you hit the ultimate jackpot. You popped champagne. But what you didn't bother to check during probate because you were too busy planning your new corner office was the debt-to-income ratio. My grandfather personally guaranteed all the operational loans on his own name. He was actively carrying $3.4 million in toxic debt to keep the fleet afloat. He was the only reason the European partners, the Rossi family, the Dubois shipping conglomerate stayed. He knew the absolute second he died, and you took over with your aggressive, disrespectful, corner-cutting management style, those partners would flee. He handed you a company that was structurally, intentionally designed to bankrupt you within a single fiscal year. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit right there on the teak decking. His knees literally buckled slightly, and he had to grab Richard's arm to stay upright. I turned my unrelenting gaze to my mother. And you, mother, you got your absolute dream home, the Harbor Point penthouse. $3.2 million of prime waterfront real estate. You bragged about it to every single woman at your country club. But you completely forgot that old money doesn't mean free money. You inherited a luxury property with $22,000 in annual property taxes. You inherited an $1,800 monthly HOA maintenance fee. And you didn't read the fine print about the upcoming $200,000 special assessment for the roof repairs that the HOA voted on last November. You haven't worked a single day in 20 years. Richard's real estate firm is currently over-leveraged and bleeding cash. Tell me, mother, how many months until the bank formally forecloses on your perfect million-dollar view? Eleanor gasped loudly, a horrible, ragged sound, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Her eyes were wide with pure terror. Finally, I looked at Tristan, the golden child, the boy who was given everything I was denied. He was currently sweating entirely through his expensive silk shirt, looking like a scared little boy. And Tristan, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a surgeon about to make a very painful incision. Enjoying the hypercars? Oh wait, I don't have to ask. I saw the insurance claim reports on the international wire. You took the Ferrari to an unsanctioned track day. You turned off the traction control to show off for your Instagram followers and spun it out into a concrete barrier. Because you couldn't afford the specialized commercial racing premium, you violated the policy terms and voided the warranty entirely. You are personally liable for $250,000 in damages. And the Rolls-Royce? It got quietly repossessed by the bank last week because you couldn't even make the luxury climate-controlled storage payments. You inherited beautiful, engineered masterpieces that required millions of dollars to maintain, and you don't even know how to check the tire pressure. He set us up, Richard whispered, his face turning a mottled, furious purple. His hands were shaking in clenched fists. That vindictive old bastard set us up to fail. No, Richard. He gave you exactly what you wanted. I fired back, my voice echoing off the massive white hulls of the surrounding superyachts. He gave you things. Expensive, shiny, demanding, depreciating things. Because he knew your souls were hollow. He knew you measured love strictly by price tags and square footage. He knew your own greed would completely blind you to the massive liabilities attached to those assets. And he gave me the one thing that doesn't rust, doesn't depreciate, and can absolutely never be repossessed by a bank. He gave me his absolute trust. He gave me his knowledge. He gave me a future. Julian, please, I am begging you. My mother cried out, genuine tears finally spilling over her heavy, expensive makeup, ruining her mascara. But they weren't tears of remorse for how she had treated me my entire life. They were tears of abject terror for her own financial survival. I'm your mother. You came from me. You have $40 million. You have a royal prince backing your every move. You have to help us. We will lose everything. Please, Julian, don't do this to your family. I don't have to do anything, I said, my voice dropping back to a terrifying, absolute calm. The storm inside me had passed. When you handed me that envelope in Charles Sterling's office and laughed right in my face while my heart was breaking, you permanently severed the very last thread connecting us. You made your choice in that room. You proudly chose the money. Now, you get to live with the devastating consequences of that choice. I turned my back on them and looked at Prince Albertine, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of quiet, profound approval. I believe we have a lunch reservation at the yacht club, Your Highness. Indeed we do, Julian, the prince said, his voice warm. He looked at my broken family one last, dismissive time. If any of you attempt to contact Mr. Vance again, or if you attempt to file a frivolous lawsuit regarding his inheritance or his trust, my personal legal team will destroy you so thoroughly that your grandchildren will be paying off the legal fees. Have a pleasant afternoon. We turned and walked away down the sunlit dock. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the desperate, panicked, vicious arguing breaking out behind me as Marcus started screaming at Richard, and Eleanor started sobbing loudly. It was the pathetic sound of a house of cards finally collapsing in the wind. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you about the absolute systemic devastation that followed that encounter. Because the universe and the ruthless laws of finance were not quite done with them yet. The fallout from that fateful day in Monaco was swift, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted. I didn't have to lift a single finger, hire a single lawyer, or enact any elaborate revenge plot to destroy them. Their own unrestrained greed, arrogance, and sheer incompetence did all the heavy lifting for me. A few weeks after the yacht show, I was sitting in my office when my private phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I hadn't saved, but one my memory unfortunately recognized immediately. It was Chloe, my ex-girlfriend. The woman who had slammed her apartment door in my face when I told her I only inherited an envelope. Julian, oh my God. I heard the rumors about Monaco. I saw a picture of you with the prince online. I am so incredibly sorry for how I acted. I was stressed and I made a huge, terrible mistake. Tristan is a complete fraud. He's broke and he treats me terribly. I miss you so much. I never stopped thinking about you. Can we please talk? I still love you. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. A year ago, that exact text message would have sent my heart racing. A year ago, I would have desperately begged for her attention, eager to prove I was worthy of her love. But sitting in my quiet, secure office overlooking the glittering Mediterranean Sea, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no vindication, just a deep, hollow pity. She didn't love me. She loved the idea of the $40 million trust she had heard whispers about. She loved the bespoke suits and the royal connections. I didn't reply. I didn't type out an angry paragraph telling her off. I didn't try to make her feel bad. I simply tapped her contact, hit block caller, and deleted the message thread. The profound, impenetrable silence was my final, definitive answer. Meanwhile, back across the Atlantic in Baltimore, the financial bloodbath was in full, terrifying swing. Tristan was the very first domino to fall. After the catastrophic Ferrari crash at the track day and the subsequent Rolls-Royce repossession, the exotic car dealership and the insurance underwriters teamed up and hit him with a massive, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit for breach of contract, negligence, and property damages. Because he had zero actual income, no marketable skills, and had rapidly blown through whatever pitiful scraps were left of his college fund on VIP bottle service and designer clothes, he had absolutely no way to pay for a competent defense attorney. The court completely destroyed him. He was forced to declare Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy at the age of 25. The golden child, the boy who was supposed to rule the world simply by existing, was currently working the overnight stocking shift at a big-box retail electronics store just to pay off the court-ordered restitution fees. His Instagram account went completely dark. Then came Uncle Marcus. His downfall was Shakespearean in its tragedy. Through Jean-Paul's incredibly deep forensic accounting contacts, a massive, dark secret finally came to light. We discovered that Marcus had been maliciously manipulating my grandfather's estate planning for years behind everyone's back. During a messy, potential divorce a decade earlier involving my mother, Marcus had secretly colluded with Charles Sterling, the slimy estate lawyer, to restructure the Vance Maritime corporate assets. He had actively, persistently lobbied my grandfather to cut me out of the company entirely, whispering vicious lies about my supposed lack of ambition and blue-collar mentality. He thought he was orchestrating an absolute masterstroke of corporate espionage to steal the entire shipping empire for himself. But Marcus was playing amateur checkers while Arthur Vance was playing three-dimensional chess. My grandfather knew exactly what Marcus was doing the entire time. He knowingly let Marcus rewrite the will to take the controlling stake of the company, fully aware that Marcus wasn't smart enough or diligent enough to thoroughly read the complex debt ledgers and the personal guarantee clauses. When the loyal European partners inevitably pulled their contracts out of disgust for Marcus, Vance Maritime defaulted on its massive federal business loans. The IRS stepped in swiftly. They audited the company, uncovered Marcus's reckless, borderline fraudulent bookkeeping practices, and seized absolutely everything to cover the back taxes. They padlocked the waterfront warehouses, seized the remaining cargo ships, and auctioned off the corporate office building. But the worst part for Marcus was the personal guarantees. He didn't just lose the company. The federal government placed a lien on his personal assets and foreclosed on his own multi-million-dollar suburban mansion to cover the staggering corporate liabilities. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of undischargeable federal debt. And then, finally, there was my mother and Richard. Richard's flashy real estate firm took a massive, unexpected hit in the commercial market crash. Without the steady, reliable cash flow from Vance Maritime Logistics to artificially prop up his incredibly bad, over-leveraged investments, his entire real estate empire crumbled to dust within 6 months. The stress of impending poverty completely shattered their marriage. He filed for a vicious, highly publicized divorce from my mother. It was a brutal, ugly legal battle where they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars they didn't have, fighting over the worthless scraps of their ruined lives, blaming each other for the collapse. My mother desperately tried to hold onto the Harbor Point penthouse. It was her ultimate prize, her status symbol, the physical manifestation of her perceived superiority. But the brutal reality of the property taxes, the crushing monthly HOA fees, and the massive special assessment for the roof completely buried her. She maxed out every credit card she had trying to stay afloat. Eventually, the bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. I found out through an automated real estate market alert that the glorious $3.2 million penthouse had been sold at a public bank auction for a mere fraction of its actual market value just to cover the outstanding liens. Eleanor Van Sterling, the woman who measured human worth entirely by the square footage of a living room and the brand name stamped on a leather purse, was forcibly evicted. With her assets frozen in the divorce and no marketable job skills, she was forced to move into a tiny, depressing, 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown, undesirable suburb of the city. She had no savings account, no 401k retirement plan, no wealthy husband to bail her out, and a bankrupt son who was sleeping on her lumpy couch. She tried to call me one last time. It went straight to voicemail. She was crying, really, genuinely sobbing into the receiver. She told me she was so sorry for everything. She told me she loved me more than anything in the world. She begged me to call her back, to just talk to her. But I knew the absolute, undeniable truth. She wasn't crying because she missed her son. She wasn't crying out of maternal guilt. She was crying because she had lost her money, her status, and her penthouse, and the son she had mercilessly mocked just happened to be the only functioning ATM left in the world. I didn't call her back. I had finally learned the hardest, most vital lesson of my entire life. Sometimes, the absolute only way to heal from deeply toxic family members is to amputate them completely from your existence. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to keep their own heads above water. They had spent their entire lives desperately collecting things that rust, things that break, and things that consume. And in the bitter end, those exact things consumed them alive. It has been a little over a year since that chaotic, defining day on the sun-drenched docks of Monaco. A lot has changed in my world. I am no longer just a junior apprentice learning the ropes of international finance. Last month, Prince Albertine pulled me into his private study and gave me a major, life-altering promotion. I am now the executive director of European Philanthropic Ventures for his sovereign wealth fund. I take the massive capital that my grandfather spent 40 years helping to build, and I direct it toward causes that actually matter. I fund global healthcare initiatives, build emergency response infrastructure in disaster zones, and finance advanced medical training programs in developing nations. I get to use high-level finance to save human lives on a scale I never, ever could have imagined back when I was a 28-year-old kid riding in the back of a Baltimore City ambulance, fighting to keep a pulse going. I make a fantastic, secure salary. I have a beautiful, quiet apartment in the Fontvieille district overlooking the water. I have the deep, genuine respect of my incredibly talented peers. But if you ask me what the most valuable thing I own is, I won't point to my bank account, my title, or my suit. I will point to a 54-foot wooden sailboat called the Horizon. It's a Tuesday evening as I tell you this. I am sitting on the worn wooden deck of the Horizon, currently moored peacefully in the quiet, protected waters of the French Riviera. The sun is setting over the mountains, casting a brilliant, breathtaking fire of orange and deep purple across the vast Mediterranean sky. I am not wearing a suit. I am wearing an old, faded gray t-shirt and canvas shorts. The air smells strongly of salt, sea spray, and absolute, unconditional freedom. I have one hand resting lightly on the heavy wooden steering wheel. The wood is worn smooth and polished by decades of use, specifically in the exact spots where my grandfather used to grip it when he fought the currents of the Chesapeake Bay. Sometimes, when the sea is incredibly quiet and the wind hits my face at just the right angle, I swear to God I can still feel Arthur Vance standing right beside me, pointing out toward the deep water. He didn't just leave me an offshore trust fund. He left me a complete blueprint for how to survive this world. He taught me that real, undeniable wealth isn't the exotic car you drive, the label on your jacket, or the panoramic view from your penthouse. Real wealth is having the internal character to show up when things get incredibly hard. It's having the patience to sit in absolute silence and observe the world instead of screaming to be noticed. It's having the integrity to build deep, meaningful relationships that aren't based on what you can extract from a person's bank account. My family looked at a simple white envelope and saw nothing but a worthless piece of paper. They laughed at it. They mocked it. They laughed at me. They did it because their minds couldn't comprehend a value that didn't come with a shiny, immediate, flashing price tag. But that envelope held a master key. A key to a heavy door they didn't even know existed, leading to a world they will never, ever be allowed to enter. I used to spend so much time lying awake at night, wishing they would just love me. I used to agonize over what was inherently wrong with me, wondering why I wasn't smart enough or good enough for my own mother, asking myself why I was always pushed to the side while Tristan was handed the world on a silver platter. I don't wonder about that anymore. I finally realize with crystal clarity that their inability to love me was never, ever a reflection of my worth as a human being. It was entirely a reflection of their own internal emptiness. You cannot pour love from an empty cup, and my family's cups were filled with nothing but toxic greed, blinding ego, and a desperate need for validation. I am Julian Vance. I am a former paramedic. I am a financial advisor. I am a sailor. And most importantly, after 28 years of feeling invisible, I am finally free. The wind is picking up right now. It's changing direction, blowing out toward the vast, open sea. I can feel it rushing against my face, rustling the rigging above me. I don't even need to look down at the water to know what's coming next. I can read the wind. And for the very first time in my entire life, the wind is firmly at my back, pushing me forward into whatever comes next. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It is never easy to air out your family's darkest, most painful moments for the world to hear, but I know, deep down, there are so many of you out there watching this right now who feel completely invisible in your own homes. You feel unappreciated, mocked, or discarded by the very people who were supposed to protect you. I want you to hear this loud and clear, and I want you to internalize it. Your value is absolutely not determined by the broken people who refuse to see you. Do not let toxic family members define your worth or write your story. Set your boundaries and make them out of steel. Build your own life, brick by brick. And when they finally realize exactly what they lost and try to come crawling back, do not let them back into your peace just because they happen to share your DNA. You owe them nothing. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever been the one left out, the one mocked and discarded, only to build something beautiful and undeniable from the ashes of their rejection? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one of them, and your courage inspires me to keep moving forward. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey we take together. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and keep reading the wind.